Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 61 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing 5 Lakers lessons from their opening night win over the Minnesota Timberwolves. I went back and rewatched the film, took a copious amount of notes, tried to dig into the offensive and defensive systems, what the Lakers are trying to do on both ends of the floor, get into some of the margin stuff. One player in particular who really impressed me despite not having that notable of box score production, and one adjustment with the lineup that I found interesting that to me, I'm going to be monitoring moving forward and want to ask JJ Redick about to try and get his perspective on it. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. All right, so lesson number 1 for me is the Lakers want an aggressive defensive identity. And what I mean by that is if you go back and watch the game and see the Lakers strategy, they were rotating hard and aggressively and closing out hard to the three-point line and either running guys off the three-point line or forcing them to adjust and take a side dribble. And that is a departure for the Lakers from their strategy from last season, when it would often be closing out short to the three-point line, especially if it was a perceived poor shooter. And LA wants to be rotating and scrambling, and it's a tiring defense. It is certainly like you saw in the first and third quarters, LeBron was gassed and needed to call for a sub because of how hard he was playing defensively. And you saw that from the 10 guys who played. Everyone was rotating hard, rotating sharply. I thought the backline rotations and the off-ball communication, guys were switching seamlessly off-ball screens and split cuts. Guys were generally in the right spots in terms of their rotations, the backline rotations, the low man. So I thought like the ability, like we saw some of that in the preseason, but and AD was brilliant. I think I focused more on his offensive end in my post-game reaction, but upon rewatching the film, like his defense was just incredible, especially switching out onto Anthony Edwards and holding his own for the most part. Like even when Ant beat him, he was able to recover or funnel him into Lakers help. So, of course, a couple times Ant is hitting jumpers over him or getting some pretty good looks, but that's just because Ant is a freak athlete who his ball handling, his agility, his burst, his athleticism, like he can create space with the best of them, right? But AD held his own for the most part, and I thought that that was just a typical AD night, but it felt like I didn't touch on it enough in my post-game reaction. But the guy who I was most encouraged by, and really like, I mean, it was shocking at times to see the defensive effort and awareness and just how locked in he was on that end, was Rui Hachimura. And Rui's especially switching, and in some cases switching when he was guarding the roller, switching onto the ball and cutting off the ball handler and beating them to the spot. And that's something that we don't often see from Rui, or don't see it enough, don't see it consistently. So I thought Rui, with his switching onto ball handlers, switching onto guards, he was active, he was engaged, and he was challenging shots. He had the block on Rudy Gobert, but also was challenging other shots around the rim. And it was just a level of effectiveness from Rui on the defensive end that we don't often see outside of, like, but we've seen him, I think he's matched up well against certain power wings and certain guys in the post. Like, this last postseason was rough with him defending Nikola Jokic, but he's had some quarters or stretches defending Jokic fairly well. We saw him defend Karl Anthony Towns before. Actually, Julius Randle has been an advantageous matchup for him in the past. So like we've seen it, especially with like post defense, and when you can simplify things for him, and it's just bang with this guy in the post and use your strength and don't let him beat you to a certain spot. Like, don't let him, drop step you. Don't let him get a good look. Like, Rui can be an effective defender, but we have not seen him necessarily do some of these complex things defensively in terms of making certain reads and rotations and switching on the ball. This was a level of defense from Rui that if you couple it with the offense, and we saw him dunk on Gobert, we saw him dunk on Randall, we saw him hit that opening three, and like he was playing very well offensively and was essentially the third option for a lot of the game, though I do expect him to be more consistently like the fourth or fifth guy. But if the Lakers get this version of Rui defensively, I think that he's a player that they have to keep. And of course, there's always exceptions depending on what players become available in the trade market. But Rui has been one of those guys just because of his contract and because he is the starting wing. And that's often been a spot to potentially upgrade. But if the Lakers are getting this version of Rui offensively and this version of Rui defensively, that is an effective two-way player who I think can help this team exceed expectations. So I don't want to overreact, right? And it's one game, but Rui has looked more engaged defensively overall. And if he continues this and can be a better and more consistent defender, again, I think this raises the ceiling of the Lakers. It raises the ceiling of the starting lineup. And it also makes Rui, to me, a more important player, because when you have that front court of AD, LeBron, and Rui, they're just so physically imposing. And with the exception of Denver and maybe a couple of other teams, they just have a size advantage against basically everybody else. And that leads to offensive rebounds and points in the paint and driving kicks and just kickouts from the post, free throws. Like, all those things are a consequence of playing with the amount of size that the Lakers have with that starting front line. So I think Rui was the guy to me who stood out the most on tape in terms of just his effort, his awareness, his focus. All those things were really, really impressive. And it might have been the best defensive performance I can recall from Rui, all things considered, just sort of like an overall performance. Not obviously, again, he's had the games where he shut down guys in the post, but this was just like an all-encompassing defensive performance from Rui for me. A couple other guys defensively. LeBron, I thought was flying around. Like, of course, there's going to be, and people can cherry pick the clips and post them online, but I thought LeBron, like, he was gassed in a few minutes into both the first and third quarters because of his defensive activity and the pace of the game and the way the Lakers, partly because of the way they're playing offensively, pushing the ball and getting out in transition. But I thought LeBron, for the most part, was being active, and there was multiple possessions where he had multiple closeouts, multiple rotations, and like I thought it was a all things considered, him being year 22, age 40, a solid defensive effort from him. D'Lo was bought in, and I thought there was a couple times he was the low man, and I felt like he could have been a little bit better with his timing in terms of rotating over, contesting, at least fouling someone, making them have to make free throws instead of getting like a layup or dunk. But D'Lo, I thought, was generally using his length well. He had a couple deflections, and I thought was playing within the scheme and what the Lakers wanted from him. And then again, off ball communication with screens, split cuts, and just guys being proactive and rotating. And so what a lot of the time the Lakers were doing was they were zoning up. When Anthony Edwards had the ball, they had one guy the one pass away helping over, and then the rest of the three guys zoning up behind him. Sometimes they also threw double teams at Ant and then were zoning up with the other three. Now that did lead to some easy either layups or dunks or open threes for Minnesota. So eventually LA went away from the double teaming. That was a little bit later in the game, but they were, I think it was a sound defensive strategy. And what the Lakers are really trying to do right now is, because they don't have those like on ball stopper types, they don't have Jared Vanderbilt healthy, they don't have a Jaden McDaniels or an Anthony Edwards or a Nickeil Alexander-Walker. A lot of it's going to be being aggressive and playing really solid team defense to make up for the lack of individual defense outside of obviously Anthony Davis. But Anthony Davis cannot be in all places at once. And if he's out on the perimeter switching out to Anthony Edwards, now all of a sudden you need to rely on Rui and LeBron and Austin and D'Lo to box out and to rotate and to be the low man and to help out on the back line. So I think the Lakers are certainly, like, to me, that This game raised what I think their defensive ceiling could be. I've often said, like, I look at this group as a group probably more in like the 15 to 20 range, and maybe they could be a little bit above that league average, but they just don't have the defensive personnel to be an above average team. I think the way that they played, and granted, Minnesota's not a good offensive team. They were 17th in offensive rating last year. They were actually the best offensive team in the West in the preseason, but that was the preseason. It didn't translate over. They still have to figure out Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo, and they got their own stuff to figure out. So I'm not trying to hype up Minnesota as this offensive test for the Lakers necessarily, but they do have Anthony Edwards, who is one of the toughest players to defend on the perimeter. And LA held him to 10 of 25 shooting. He had 27 points on 25 shots. So I think the Lakers will take that. Like that's a win for the Lakers defense. And if they can defend like this on a consistent basis, and there's going to be mistakes, there's going to be off nights, right? But if they can defend like this for most nights, I think this is a group that could knock on the door to the top 10 and maybe not quite get there. But if there's a big difference between being the 12th best defense and the 20th best defense, and you couple in the fact that I think the offense looked really, really good, and I'm going to touch on that with one of my lessons. If they start hitting threes and playing offense the way that they're capable of and the way that they played in the preseason, and they can just nudge past league average defensively, that is a really, really good team that I think can compete for home court advantage in the West, granted that they stay healthy. So the defense to me was the most encouraging and biggest picture takeaway of all. And again, it's one game, it's opening night. Minnesota has plenty to figure out on their end. So this could not be like, well, the Lakers have two big tests coming up with Phoenix and Sacramento and a home back-to-back that will tell us a lot about where this team's at and where they're at defensively against those two offenses, and two offenses that quite frankly couldn't be more different, with Phoenix having these three ISO scorers. They are jacking up more threes now, but they just have a certain level of individual talent on the perimeter and now some bolstered firepower and shooting. And then you have a team in Sacramento that has given the Lakers a lot of problems over the past 2 years. They're 7-1 against the Lakers over the past two regular seasons, but they run their offense through a big man in Domantas Sabonis. Also have the two-man game with De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis, and just De'Aaron Fox is the type of small guard that has given the Lakers problems over the past couple years as well. So those are two big tests for the Lakers defense, and they'll be facing Sacramento on the second night of a back-to-back, which is going to be tough. But I don't want to overhype the defense or say they're going to be like a top 5 or even top 10 defense, but I think there's a chance that they could be above league average, which based on the current personnel is a win in my opinion. And I think largely it is because of their principles, their rotations, their awareness, and the aggression of dictating terms more so than letting the offense dictate terms. And again, one game, but so far I am encouraged with the defense. Lesson number 2 is the offensive priorities are in check. And what I mean by that is I've been a big proponent of the Lakers taking more threes over the past few years. I felt like them being a bottom 10 three-point shooting team in terms of volume has been an archaic approach to offense that just doesn't work in 2024. It's really hard to be right there with some of the worst offenses in the league in terms of three-point volume and expect to contend. So I'm on board with them taking more threes. I've wanted them. I've advocated for it. I've written multiple columns and stories on it. But that said, I did feel like there were times in the preseason where it got a little out of hand with them just jacking up the first semi-open look that they had. That there was multiple stats about them taking more contested jumpers than they did last regular season. You also saw it in transition with certain guys taking pull-up threes that I felt were ill-advised and just didn't really fit with the way that this team should be playing. And JJ said his goal was 5 to 6 more threes per game than last season, which would put the Lakers at about 36.5 to 37.5 attempts. They attempted 38.5 during the preseason, so they went a little bit over that, but they've largely been in line with where JJ has wanted them. But to rewatch it on Tuesday, LA's priority was to get to the rim, and that is still the strength of this team. They have two of the best finishers in the league in LeBron and AD. They have multiple guys who put pressure on the rim, who draw fouls, and who get you in the bonus. So that to me is still the strength of this team. I think it's more so cutting out some of the mid-range shots, and you saw that where the Lakers only took 6 2-pointers outside of the paint. So everything was basically a paint shot or a 3-pointer. And now they only attempted 33 pointers, which was actually fewer than they attempted last season. Last season, they averaged 31.5 per game, which was 28th in the NBA. So they actually took fewer threes than they did last season. But when you score 72 points in the paint, when you get to the free throw line 25 times, I think you live with the 30 attempts. And now they only made 5 of them, which was, I believe, 16.7%. Looking at the box score, but so not a great 3-point shooting performance. And the Lakers struggled during the preseason. They shot under 30% on threes. So certainly they've been in a little bit of a slump, and maybe that's just them reacting to looking for more threes and just kind of getting acclimated and adjusted to that style of offense. But they looked more like the Lakers of last season in terms of shot selection and shot priorities. And I think that's a good thing. Now, offensively, I mean, it was an incredible performance from the Lakers. Their ATOs, like JJ's just drawn up some great ATOs. They have kept some of the stuff from the coaching staff, and that's something that Kranjis has been harping on, that some of the stuff that people will clip and post, like it was stuff the Lakers were previously running, but they're just running it so much more consistently, so much more effectively, and where you'll see them run in action, and then the very next possession, they will go back to the same action, but then they will run a different wrinkle within the action. They will go to a different option. So if we just scored on you or got a good look from option A, now we're on to option B. So instead of the dribble handoff, we're going to fake that, and then the next guy is going to come and get a dribble handoff, or we're going to shovel a quick pass to him and then go screen for that guy. And like, there's just been these fun wrinkles within the offense, and it's been nice to see them run a more consistent and structured offense, but also run different wrinkles within it and not go away from something that's working. Because that's been, LeBron talked about it openly last year. Like, that was something that the Lakers did far too frequently, and he talked about it actually on the Mind the Game pod, that, you know, if you run something and it works, run it again and keep running it until an opponent, you know, can figure out how to stop it or slow it down. So I think you saw a little bit of that. I think they could even take it to a different level, but that's been something that's been encouraging, particularly out of Horns. They've been very effective, but 5 out, 4 out. I think this is a group that the spacing principles have been really good. They generated a lot of good looks. Like, I think there's a world where instead of going 5 for 30, they go 10 for 30, which is still not even a good 3-point shooting performance, or even 12 or 13 for 30. And we're talking about a 20, 25 plus point blowout against the Timberwolves with basically the exact same game. It's just the Lakers make those threes that they missed. So like I was mainly encouraged by the defense, just because my expectations are lower with the defense, but the offense was just as impressive, honestly. And like, this is a group that, to me, if they can perform like this offensively consistently, maintain the structure and the patience and the buy-in. And like, there's a couple times, like, you know, Rui, I think, took a couple mid-range jumpers I didn't love. Austin started cooking in the mid-range in the third quarter. So like, but in those instances, I think you just ride with it. And with Rui, I think he did so many other things well that, you know, if he takes a bad shot or two, it's fine. But I mean, the Lakers pretty much took out all mid-range jumpers outside of paint mid-range jumpers. And I mean, Lakers just offensively are at a really high level right now. And I think this is a group that can be a top 5, if not top 3 offense, if they stay healthy and can maintain this. And then the final thing with the offense was, it was remarkable to see the Lakers effectively attack a zone. So Minnesota a couple times went to a 2-3 zone, and LA actually had an offensive counter to that. And like, how many times over the past couple of years did LA really struggle to attack a zone defense? And whenever a team went zone, LA got flustered and they stopped scoring and they got stagnant, and it went into a lot of ISO ball, a lot of bad contested shots or turnovers. And they were so effective with their zone that Minnesota, in both instances, went away from the zone, but within several possessions, just because LA was scoring or getting good looks or getting offensive rebounds, and they knew they were very well prepared, hitting often the guy in the middle, whether it was AD or Jackson, kind of around the free throw line, and then flowing from there, either attacking downhill or having a guy back cut the zone, or just going into different actions. But like, they were prepared. They had some zone sets that they were ready for, and they executed them well. So that's another thing here of, it's not just the man-to-man offense, but their zone offense looked good, and they quickly forced Minnesota to get out of it. So that's progress in and of itself. So a lot to be encouraged by on both ends. The offense, of course, has the higher ceiling just because of the firepower, but the Lakers didn't even shoot that well. They still scored 72 points in the paint. They still generated a ton of good looks. They still got to the free throw line. And that, to me, is the recipe for this team to be very successful offensively. The third lesson was a flip in substitution pattern. And I'm specifically talking about Austin and D'Lo. So if you go back and look at the two first halves that LA ran with a semi-normal rotation, basically the substitution pattern within the first quarter was Austin would come out for Gabe about midway through the first quarter, then come back in for AD to close the quarter, and then start the second quarter alongside Dalton, Rui, LeBron, and Jackson. And D'Lo would play most of the first quarter before eventually coming out for LeBron, who had come out earlier, usually comes out around like the 7-minute mark. But JJ Redick flipped that with the opening night rotation, where D'Lo was actually the guy who came out midway through the first quarter for Gabe, and then came back in for AD to close the quarter, and then open the second quarter with that Dalton, Rui, LeBron, Jackson lineup. And then Austin was the guy who played most of the first quarter, came out when LeBron came back in, and then came back in about midway through the second quarter. And I thought that was interesting because it split up a pairing that I've talked about in terms of pairing LeBron and Austin, and then pairing AD and D'Lo, and it swapped those, where it was actually Austin and AD and LeBron and D'Lo that were both paired more during this game. And it's interesting because you would think that because D'Lo is such a good ball handler and playmaker, you would want him and LeBron swapped, but it ended up not working out that way. It ended up those two kind of supercharging each other and playing a bit more together. And I will say, though, I haven't been able to ask JJ about this, so I do want to try and get some sort of insight or explanation for the reason for him deciding to go away from what he had tried a couple times in the preseason. And maybe he just didn't like it. Maybe it's as simple as that. He didn't like the minutes that he saw. But another interesting part of this for me was that looking at the lineup data, Austin and AD were a +8 in 33 minutes. And LeBron and D'Lo were a +6 in 27 minutes. And while both of those are technically positive, when you look at some of the other pairings, especially within the starting lineup, Austin and Rui, Rui and D'Lo, even Austin and D'Lo, all of those pairings had double-digit plus minuses. So they were a little bit more effective with certain other starting combinations compared to the new pairings that the Lakers are trying. And maybe it goes back to the preseason rotation or substitution pattern against Phoenix or against Sacramento. But my read on the situation and just really thinking about it in rewatching the game was, I think JJ wanted D'Lo and Jackson to play more together because of their chemistry. And you saw that with D'Lo finding him for dunks and for lobs. And then he also wanted Austin and Gabe to play more together, which is a pairing that makes sense. And if you look at the minutes, like those two ended up playing more than D'Lo and Gabe played together. And then Jackson played more with D'Lo than he did with Austin. So that's like my kind of simple read of it, because otherwise everything was basically the same. Like Max comes in for LeBron early in the first and third quarters. You got Gabe and Jackson checking in around the same time in the first and third quarters. You got Dalton checking in at the beginning of the second and the beginning of the fourth. That got messed up a little bit because Max was in foul trouble. But like the rotation patterns through the first like 3.5 quarters have largely been the same if you just extrapolate out what they did in the preseason. So like that's clearly by design. Like the coaching staff clearly has a way they want the rotation to run. Certain kind of like, then you see in the middle of the first quarter, they go with the Jackson, AD, LeBron front line, and then they go with that 3-2 zone where AD's at the top of the key, the top of the arc, and Jackson and LeBron are on the back line. So like LA there's been some predictability in terms of the rotation and substitution patterns, certain lineups, certain guys playing a certain amount of minutes. Again, other than Max getting in foul trouble with 5 fouls in 12 minutes, everyone played about what you would expect. I would love to hear from JJ on that, and I am planning on asking him at tomorrow's game about it. Lesson number 4 is Dalton Knecht is already LA's best bench weapon offensively. And he did not have, looking at the box score here, Dalton only had 5 points in just under 16 minutes, 2 for 4 from the floor, 1 for 3 on threes. But to me, the thing that I was really impressed by with Dalton, and this is something that I've been increasingly impressed by with him, was his playmaking. And we often talk about the shooting and all the different ways that you can use him, and him being a 3-level scorer and the athleticism and being able to attack the rim. But to me, the playmaking, and specifically his ability to be a pick and roll ball handler, and because of the threat of him either taking a pull-up 3 or him attacking downhill, that shifts the defense in a way. So on one possession, LeBron is bringing the ball up the floor, and the Lakers are in horns with Jackson and Dalton around the elbows, and LeBron throws an entry pass to Jackson at the left elbow, and Dalton immediately goes and sets a back screen for LeBron. So that creates that possibility of LeBron getting a back cut for a dunk or a layup or a foul or whatever. And then Dalton immediately flows into sort of a dribble handoff. It was basically a bounce pass from Jackson immediately into a screen. So it's kind of like a dribble handoff screen, if you will. And immediately the Wolves send 2 toward Dalton, and Dalton hits Jackson. And Jackson, because he's so long and athletic, just takes 1 step and just inside the free throw line goes up and dunks it. It was just incredible play start to finish, but that's the type of way that I think Dalton can be used. And then they also had an empty side pick and roll on the left side where the Wolves also sent 2 to the ball with Dalton. They iced the ball screen, and then he threw a kickback pass to AD, who had popped out, and then AD hit a 3-pointer. So like those 2 plays, it was just 2 assists, two simple situations, but you saw that when Dalton faces a double team or 2 guys running at him, he's not panicked. He makes the quick read, and in both instances, he creates a dunk for Jackson and a 3 for AD. So I think that the Lakers, like, of course, there's going to be ways to use him better offensively and more wrinkles to throw in. And Chris Finch said pregame that he's seen a lot of good wrinkles for shooters from JJ's offense so far. And that makes sense. And it makes sense that Dalton would be the one guy who could really do that. So I think he missed a couple of good looks from deep. And I'm sure he's going to have more nights like that Phoenix preseason game where he makes a bunch of threes and is just lighting up the box score. But it's just, for me, the next level of it is Dalton's ball handling and playmaking are underrated. And I think those are things that the Lakers can lean into more. And I think that they've tried to rely more on Gabe and Max as playmakers, as pick and roll ball handlers, as creators and initiators in certain second unit lineups. And I just think Dalton is, he's clearly a better shooter than both of them, but already some of the playmaking I've seen from him, I think if the Lakers really lean into that and develop it more, that's just an element of his game that is going to make him very valuable. So the defense is, to me, going to be the make or break thing with Dalton. And I still think he's held up, fairly well, and he will get blown by or beaten on the perimeter, but he rotates well. He's aggressive, and he talked about it. We talked with him today at practice, and he said he likes playing in the paint. He likes being physical. He likes hitting people on rebounds, and he is a strong, tough wing. So like you see that from him. He's not a finesse player by any means. Now, can his lateral quickness be a little bit better and just, his ability to contain on the perimeter? Yes, but I think he's going to only continue to grow as a player, but also grow in importance to this team and grow with his role with this team. So I think Dalton is if we're looking at Max, Gabe, Jackson, even Christian and Vando, like the guy that I think can contribute the most offensively is going to be Dalton. And maybe that was obvious, and I just needed to see it to confirm that. I know I had Pete Zayas on, and his bold Lakers prediction was over the second half of the season, Dalton's going to be top 5 in bench scoring, and I can see it. I can really see it. And, but not like Phoenix game aside, even just off this 5-point, 2-assist game, you see the kernels of the player that he can be. And with more reps, more experience, more confidence, and being used in different ways, I think the offensive ceiling for Dalton is very, very high this season. Not even talking about who he's going to be when he's 25, when he's 27, but this season, I think he can contribute a lot off the bench. And the fifth and final lesson was LA controlled the margins. They decisively won the possession battle. So I have it here. Like JJ talked about this from the moment that he was hired at his introductory press conference, at his media day, and since in practices and pre and post game availabilities, he's always talking about the margins and the details and how important those things are. And so I thought the corner crashing worked really well. You saw multiple possessions where Rui, Max, and Austin crashed from either the weak side corner or the weak side wing, and were able to sneak behind Minnesota's defense to get offensive rebounds. Just in general, LA was more aggressive in attacking the offensive glass, and that's why they had 15 offensive rebounds and out-rebounded Minnesota in terms of the offensive rebound battle, 15-12. Minnesota got some second-half rebounds where it was a lot of long misses that went to around the free throw line or the three-point line that Minnesota was able to collect those, and that's something that LA needs to shore up defensively. But outside of that stretch, and at that point, LA was up double figures, and like I think that they let their foot off the gas a little bit. But to their credit and to the coaching staff's credit, LA was able to refocus and just settle down a bit and just get back into the game in terms of controlling the defensive glass. But that was a big thing, was the rebounding battle on both sides of the ball. Then there was also fast break points. LA outscored Minnesota 17-7. So anytime Minnesota turned the ball over or missed, LA was pushing, and they were attacking them in transition, where they were able to especially go at Gobert, Naz Reid, Julius Randle, like that front, like for as great as Gobert is in drop coverage and as a rim protector, if you get him out in the open floor, you can attack him. And if you get him out in space, you can attack him. Same thing with Naz Reid or Julius Randle. So I thought LA did a really good job of scheming for Minnesota's defensive weaknesses in terms of the transition defense. But you also look at the turnovers. JJ mentioned that the pregame they discussed that the fewest amount of turnovers an opponent had against Minnesota last season was 8. And LA wanted to see if they could top that. And they did. They had 7 turnovers, which is, I mean, that's quite incredible. And they outscored Minnesota 19-6 in terms of points off of turnovers. So that was a big swing factor, was turnovers, offensive rebounds, transition points. LA actually didn't have the typical free throw advantage. Minnesota attempted 2 more free throws and LA fouled them 5 more times. But part of that to me was an aggression thing where like Max Christie had 5 fouls in less than 12 minutes, but several of those fouls were fouling big men around the rim to prevent offensive putbacks or layups or dunks or whatever. So like I like those types of fouls. Obviously, he had a couple that were iffy that I think could have gone in the Lakers' favor, or it could have been non-calls. I think he had one that was not great on his part, but like for the most part, if you're going to be fouling, like I'm always a proponent of foul a big man or foul a bigger player around the basket. And there are certainly going to be exceptions to that, but I'm like, earn it at the free throw line, right? Like don't give someone an easy, and of course don't give up an and one. Like you got to foul them with a certain level of physicality and force, but don't give up a dunk or a layup. Like prevent that. And if like send them to the free throw line and make them earn it. So I thought LA did a solid job with that. And then they attempted 10 more shots than the Wolves, which to me was probably the difference in the game. And you factor in the offensive rebounds and the turnovers, and like that led to LA did shoot better than Minnesota. And really the only reason it was close is because the Wolves made 13 threes, LA only made 5. So that plus 24 advantage at the 3-point line was a big advantage for Minnesota. But that aside, LA won with turnovers and offensive rebounds and fast break points and points in the paint. And like they played, pretty much as perfectly as you can play the margins. LA was like right there. Like, again, there's going to be mistakes. There was defensive breakdowns. Like that's to be expected. No one's going to play a perfect game. No one's going to play a perfect 82 games. But to me, LA prioritize the margins way more than any really the past couple of years. It's just been the free throw margin. They've been, they've struggled with turnovers. They've not been a good offensive rebounding team. They have often not taken more shots than their opponents, and they've been an inconsistent fast break team. So I thought LA, like prioritizing a lot of the things that they're prioritized, if they can win those battles, maybe they're not going to win them every night, or you're certainly not going to win them every night, but maybe they're not going to win the same ones every night. But if you can corner crash consistently, if you can be a low turnover team, if you can get to the free throw line, and if you can generally take more shots than your opponent, those are all things that give you an advantage and give you a shot against just about anybody. Again, I don't want to overhype this team. I don't want to overreact, but my expectations have increased just a bit with how organized and focused and locked in and aware this group was on both sides of the ball. And if they can increase their defensive ceiling and actualize their offensive potential and be a top 5 offense and a top 12, top 13 defense, like that's a really, really good team that easily wins 50 games, assuming that they could stay healthy. And maybe we have a different conversation next week after the Phoenix and Sacramento games. I want to start doing these film lessons, these film takeaways after bigger games more consistently. So that's something that I'm going to be prioritizing with certain episodes throughout the week is, and even start potentially, if you guys want to see some film breakdowns and me splicing some stuff in, I want to start doing that. A lot to be encouraged by with the Lakers, and a lot, like the ceiling is still much higher with this group in terms of they generated a lot of good looks and missed a ton of them, missed a ton of shots around the rim that they normally make. So like this could have been a 130 point night for them, and instead it was 110. So 1-0 start. Lakers will take that, and really I think would take a split this weekend with Phoenix and Sacramento. But who knows? Maybe they end up winning all 3 of those and enter that upcoming 5-game road trip with some serious momentum and some serious confidence after starting the season so well. So I will be documenting it all. By the way, if you guys have not checked it out yet, I posted a opening night vlog from the Lakers Timberwolves game. I take you behind the scenes at shoot around. I take you behind the scenes at the arena, behind the scenes pre and post game, and even during the game a bit. So it's about a 3-minute video, so not too long. Make sure you check that out. I will be sure to have that as the recommended video for this episode. But thank you all so much for watching and listening. As always, for those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back Friday with a live post-game reaction after the Phoenix Suns game, so be on the lookout for that. I will talk to you soon.